Now that we've got these goals, do they work? You know, according to these theories, potentially goal setting would encourage us to work hard, focus our attention. But if we've got a group of girls like this trying to smash out as many sit-ups as they can, do goals help them perform well? So let's talk about that. Lerner and Locke did one study on this where they got 60 undergraduates and they got them to do a 1-minute sit-up test, which is where you do as many sit-ups as you can in a minute effectively. And they set people a couple of different goals. In some groups they gave them a medium goal, which is what most people could achieve. They got the average of a different group and they said, well, what's the 50th percentile, the halfway point? Okay, most people can get to this, so let's see if we set them that goal, whether it helps. They got another group and they said, well, maybe if we give them a really hard goal, that will help them perform really well, maybe push themselves harder. Okay, so they gave some groups a really difficult goal, which only 10% of people could achieve. And in the last group, they got people to count backwards from 100 by 3. Now that's a weird thing to do, but if you think about it, as you do sit-ups, you might set goals anyway. And so what they tried to do is by asking you to count backwards, you go 97, 94, 91, 88. It makes it difficult for you to count your own sit-ups at the same time. And so the idea was by doing that, it would eliminate any ability for these participants to set any goals. In this study, they also compared having competition, doing it with other people, like in that previous photo, versus no competition, just doing it against the goal. And what did they find? Well, first of all, you can see that the control condition is the lowest, and the group here didn't perform very well at all. Okay, they got 40, which was well below that medium goal. So on average, they did worse than most people. But setting a goal, any goal, in this sit-up test improved performance by about 5 or 10 sit-ups, okay? And you can see the difference between the competition and the no competition isn't that high. So that's important. It's almost like the goal is replacing the competition. Competing against a goal is neutralizing the effect of having that competition there, because we often see that competition does help in these situations. The other thing to notice is that the hard goal and the medium goal are pretty similar. They're very close to being the same. And so this study is suggesting that, well, it doesn't necessarily matter if it's a really difficult goal or a moderately difficult goal, that in these physical tasks it does help and it's better than no goal. Okay, so goals seem to be working here. So they found that both hard and medium goals improve performance compared to this do your best or no goal condition. And the effects of different goals and of competition weren't significant in this particular study. Now the issue with goal setting research is there's a lot of research. There's about, I think, 36 studies in 1996. So Kilo and Landers went through and looked at all of those studies and tried to put them together to look for themes. And some of these themes match the theories that we've got and some of them don't. So let's talk about what they found. The first thing they found was that only the moderately difficult goals were effective on average. And they defined moderately difficult ones as things anywhere between 50% chance of success and a 10% chance of success. If it was less than 10, if you had like a 5% chance, they thought that was a really difficult goal. And if it was really easy, so you had a 90% chance of succeeding, then they saw that as an easy goal, okay? But those moderately difficult goals were the most effective. And that tends to suggest that keeping people's self-efficacy up is important in goal setting. If you set them a really difficult goal that no one's going to achieve, then they might not believe in themselves and therefore their performance goes down. Okay, so we're trying to set goals that are in this moderately kind of difficult range. It was really interesting to find that outcome goals were effective, and these performance goals, which were like trying to beat your own time or do your best goal, wasn't necessarily as effective. So this is really interesting because this doesn't necessarily match what you would intuitively think. You would think that by trying to compete against yourself, which you're in control of, might be more motivating than trying to beat someone else. But this is saying that that level of competition that comes from an outcome goal is motivating. Do your best goals, just have a crack at it. Those sorts of things weren't that helpful at all. It was good to know that setting long-term goals only didn't really do anything. Short-term goals were best when they were used in conjunction with long-term goals. So having both long and short-term goals are the most effective at enhancing long-term performance. Okay, so it's kind of nice to have that goal of winning a grand final or something right down the track like a gold medal, but what this is saying is you need those steps between here and there to be able to optimize your performance. Publicly professing your goals in these studies seem to have a bigger effect size and were more effective than keeping them private. So I understand why someone like Michael Phelps wouldn't want to say what their goal is, but this is saying that with a lot of athletes or participants that they tested on goal setting in sport, it was better for people to profess their goals. So it's a little bit like if you said, hey, I want to run a marathon. If you say that to all your friends, you start to be accountable. They ask you, oh, how's your marathon training going, etc., etc. Whereas if in your head and you keep it private and you're like, okay, just, you know, I would like to run a marathon one day, then there's less accountability for your behaviour. So public goals tended to be more effective than private ones. In men particularly, these outcome goals were the most effective. So in men, it was found that having that level of competition, of trying to beat someone else, was a very effective motivator and source of striving. And that was more so than these mastery goals or ones where they were off working as a team. So in guys, this sort of study of studies said that outcome goals were the most effective. And that's interesting because that doesn't necessarily match with the achievement goal theory that we talked about earlier on. What might explain this is that novices got more benefit from goals than professionals. And so when you're looking at someone who is new to doing sit-ups, competing against someone else might be helpful. If you've got someone at a boot camp, for example, trying to beat or catch up or not come last, whatever those outcome goals, might help push people harder. And in elite athletes, it didn't seem to be that helpful, that having a outcome goal wasn't as effective as when you had a novice athlete. So that could explain partially why things like outcome goals weren't as helpful, were helpful. And that's because I think elite athletes often have outcome goals already. You don't have to teach an elite athlete to want to win. We don't have to do an intervention to see whether, to say, hey, how cool would it be to win a gold medal and to write that down. Most elite athletes have some sort of outcome or competitive orientation in mind when they start. So teaching them about outcome goals isn't that effective. There's also more anxiety and pressure in elite performance. There's more at stake. And so potentially the anxiety created by an outcome goal is more debilitative at an elite level, but motivating at a beginner level, where there's not a whole lot of pressure or anxiety to perform. And that comes back to the arousal performance curve. When we're working with elite athletes, they might be highly aroused, activated, anxious, and setting outcome goals could push it further. When we're working with beginner or novice athletes, they may not be that motivated or feel any pressure to perform well, and so an outcome goal could push them up a little bit. So that would help explain some of these systems. And lastly, allowing individuals to participate in the goal setting was found to be an important factor in trying to help motivate and get buy-in from the participant. So if I said, hey, just get down and give me 50, that's not as effective as saying, well, how many push-ups do you think you can do? What would be a challenging goal? Could we lift that a little bit, etc.? Guiding people into building their own goal rather than just pushing it onto people. And we'll talk about that a little bit more. And so if we're working with a candidate like this, who might be our perfect candidate for goal setting, you can see this young fella is very competitive already. He's the one with his racing bib, his lycra, his road bike, racing against all the other kids in their cute little polystyrene helmets. And this being a young man who seems like a relative novice compared to, say, a professional athlete, having an outcome goal in this situation could be effective for this person, okay? But giving them the outcome goal is not going to be as effective as going, hey buddy, how do you want to go in this? What sort of would you like to achieve? Okay, do you want to make state, nationals, etc.? Like, helping them figure out their goal might be a really interesting way of approaching this particular person. if you were setting goals with the people behind, they're novices as well, and the idea is that if they're not that motivated to work hard, then according to the research we just presented, it might help motivate them to work a little bit harder and at least potentially come second, okay? So how do we resolve these conflicting results? Like I said, achievement goal theory says this mastery orientation is more functional and more appropriate. And in this goal setting research, it's saying, well, outcome goals, setting, for men, is wanting to win that competition is really helpful for performance. So I think there's two things going on here, okay? And I'll try to find a bit of a solution in the middle ground. The first thing is, I think that the achievement goal theory is often oriented at professional athletes, where the issue is overactivation, too much kind of motivation, if you will, too much pressure to succeed. And for that reason, outcome goals for that population can create more anxiety and more pressure and more focus on something unhelpful. Whereas the goal setting research is stereotypically done on undergraduates at a lower level with less experience, and potentially they're a group that need more motivation, okay? So as I discussed earlier, it could be just trying to help move people up this bell curve, but elite athletes, it's not helpful to do that. So I think the solution here is to identify who your participant is and what their problem is. Goal setting is a tool for increasing motivation. It's not necessarily just a band-aid bullet wound sort of situation where if someone's choking, you set them a goal and then fix them right up. You've got to diagnose the right solution to the right problem, and I think both a combination of outcome goals, which elite athletes probably have already, and the mastery and performance goals are most helpful in most circumstances.